Hey everybody, welcome. It's Caleb, and welcome to your Python web development introduction with Flask. Now, this is actually a section in my course Python Bootcamp, so if you want to check out the full course, I'll leave a link below. Thank you and enjoy the rest of the video. In this episode, we are going to set up our Python Flask environment. Ideally, for this episode, you have some basic Python experience. You already have it installed, you know how to run Python files, and so forth. If throughout this you have any issues, I'm sure you can find easy solutions online, but overall it's not going to be too bad, and I'll give you some tips here and there. So the very first thing is you need to be in some editor. I'm using Sublime Text, and I have this Sublime Text set up a little bit custom based off of Corey Schaefer's YouTube video on how to set up a Python Sublime Text environment, which I would recommend if you want to get a really similar setup to this. And I created a folder for our project, which it's a little tiny over here, but it says testimonials. So we're building an app to record testimonials, and we're going to do all of our development in this folder. So another thing is I'm using a plugin here, Terminus, and this allows me to open a terminal in this directory inside of Sublime. Now you don't necessarily have to use this little plugin here. You could just use a normal terminal window. That will work just fine as well. But for now, I'm going to use this just to keep the interface clean, and we're going to follow a pretty simple process. Very first thing, create the project directory, done. Set up a virtual environment, activate the virtual environment, install packages inside of the environment, create a requirements.txt to keep track of all of our requirements, and then we'll just create a basic Hello World application on this machine. So fairly simple, basically a bunch of steps to create a hello world, but it's going to be pretty cool. So to create a virtual environment, first you would say Python, and you want to use the correct version of Python. So you might have to type Py if you're on Windows, or Python 3. And you can figure it out by putting -- version. So for example, Python 3 -- version, I get Python 3.9. So that is the command that I'm going to be using. To create a virtual environment, we say Python 3 -m venv for virtual environment, and then we give this virtual environment a name. I'm going to call it .venv for a hidden folder. Hit enter, and that's going to create this folder inside of this testimonials folder, which you might need to refresh. Oh, actually, it's there. I just wasn't opening it. All right, so there's our virtual environment folder, and this is going to have a bunch of stuff in here, including this activate file, which is what we need to get to activate our virtual environment. So what we're going to do is we're going to say source.venv/bin/activate. Hit enter, and now you got this parentheses .venv over here on the left, which tells us that the virtual environment is activated. Quick tip is if you say source and then you start typing, you can use tab to get the different options. So .venv/b tab, and then a tab for activate. So that's just a little shortcut there for you. So we're in our virtual environment, and first thing I want to do is just clear. Now what we're going to do is we're going to check to see what dependencies we have installed in our virtual environment. Now for this, you're going to use the command pip or pip3. And you can try both of these. When you type them by themselves, you should get a response with some extra information. Or, if we try pip3, you'll get a response as well. And you can also get the version if you want to make sure you're using the best version. And if typing pip or pip3 doesn't give you a response, what you can do is you can go back to using Python and then say -m pip - version. And this is how you're going to invoke pip if you don't have it added to your path. Anyways, what were we saying? Yes, we're going to look at our dependencies. So what we can do is we can say pip and then list. And we get some information here, pip. Here's our version of pip. And then we have setup tools. It says we can upgrade if we want. And here's actually the command to do that. So you can copy that, paste it here. And that's going to upgrade pip. And now we can use the up arrow keys to go back to pip list. And you can see we have pip.3.3. We can install a package by saying pip install and then the package name Flask. That's going to install stuff, and that's going to have dependencies of its own. So when we list our dependencies, we're going to have a bunch here now, including Flask, the one we chose, Jinja, and some other ones here as well. So what we want to do now is we want to take this list and put it inside of a requirements.txt. Now before you do that, if you have other things to install, you can do that here first, just so we have the complete list. But all we need for right now is Flask. So what we're going to do is we're going to say pip freeze and then direct this output to requirements.txt. Hit enter, and you'll see requirements.txt appear here over in the file structure. You can open that, take a look, and see all of our packages. And now we can actually create our first application. So I'm just going to say touch application.py. That will create our application file right here. I mean, you could just right click add new file, but you got to use the terminal because it's fancy. Now, if you're on another computer, and let's say you download this code from GitHub or something, and you need to install all of the dependencies inside of requirements.txt, instead of going into that file and typing out install each one of these, what you can do is you can just say pip install -r requirements.txt, and that will install everything. And you can see scrolling through here, it says already satisfied for every single one on the list. This also means if you install anything in the future, you might want to update that requirements.txt file so the code will work for anyone who downloads this from GitHub or if you transfer this code somewhere else. Now enough on that, let's go ahead and create our first application. And I'm going to shut the files over here on the left using Command KB. And what we'll do is we'll say from, it's a little tiny, let me zoom in for you. From Flask, import Flask with a capital F here, lowercase here. So this is the package, this is the class we are importing, and then we create a new Flask application by creating a variable traditionally called app. So Flask, we will invoke that constructor, and we pass in __ name. Next up, we create a route, app.route, and we'll pass a string with just a /. So this is basically the web address we're going to visit to hit this route. And you'll see what I mean here soon. And then what we do is we create a function for this route. We'll call it index and return hello. So that was a lot of stuff, but we will go through all of this throughout the videos. So this is how we create a hello world, and this is pretty much directly from the Flask documentation on getting started. Now I want to talk about how do you actually run a Flask application. So there's a few things you need to do. You need to set some environment variables. So to do that on Mac, you say export, and I think on Windows you use set. So we'll say export Flask, and actually this is going to be in all caps, Flask app, and we put the name of the file. So application.py, like so. And let me zoom out just a tad so you can see it all on one line when I type it out. And we'll do another one, export Flask env, and set this equal to development. So those are the two environment variables you need to set, and anytime you open the terminal for a new session, you will need to create these environment variables. And you'll know they're set because if you try to run the Flask application without setting the Flask app, it's not going to work. So I'll show you how to do that now. You just say Flask run, hit enter, and it's going to paste some stuff in here, including a web address. So you can visit this web address. This is the equivalent of localhost. I'm going to open that, and this is what it's going to look like. You can see it says hello. Now again, this is the loopback address, meaning it's just our local machine. We could replace this with localhost, and it works just the same. We're not going out on the internet, it's just a local development server. And when we visit this page, we're going to get some information in the terminal saying what we are requesting. So we are requesting the home page, and we get a 200 response, which means it was okay. So to understand a little bit more about the server we're developing this on locally, if you take a look at the Flask homepage, it talks briefly about this tool right here, which I'm not even sure how to pronounce, but it says it's a WSGI toolkit. And that doesn't really mean a whole lot unless you understand what WSGI is. Well, basically, this is a standard for all the different Python web development frameworks, for example, Flask, Django. These can all be deployed easily to popular web servers such as Nginx, as long as they adhere to this WSGI standard. And this tool, Zug, I don't know. It makes it easier for this tool to adhere to those standards. So this is just a library to help the framework deploy to servers. I probably totally destroyed that explanation, but honestly, I'm not a real expert in this. But basically, as long as this web development framework adheres to WSGI, then we can deploy it to something like Nginx, which is available all across the internet. So you can do it on AWS or Google Cloud Platform or whatever you like. There's also another common one, which is ASGI, which is kind of the successor of WSGI. So this is supported in Django and also tools like Fast API. The primary difference being that this is built for asynchronous web, where WSGI is not. So this tool here, it includes a little development server, which you will see running right here in the terminal, and we can test our application with this tool. But for deployment, you're going to want to use a real web server, a popular one being Nginx, and that's what we'll be using with Amazon Web Services. We'll get into all of the details of that later, but for now, just know the basics of this, that the web server given with this tool here is not really for deployment, but it does help us meet some standards for how applications work, and that standard is WSGI. Let's talk a little bit briefly about this code so we can understand it best for the upcoming videos. The very first thing you should notice first is that the actual code for our application is extremely thin, and this is why I appreciated Flask getting started. I didn't have to have a bunch of code just to write a hello world application. Basically, we just write it out one line at a time. That being said, it can still be confusing because there's a lot going on in these few lines of code, so I want to go over each piece. The first line, from Flask, import Flask, brings the Flask class from the Flask module into scope. This allows us to use the module in our code. This is a pretty standard practice in Python. The next one is a bit more cryptic. App is equal to Flask __ name __. Well, this here is how we create a new Flask object, and we are assigning it to a variable called app. The thing that might be a little bit more confusing, __ name __. This will have the value __ main __ when we run our application directly. This took me some time to wrap my brain around, and I didn't really understand the purpose of it, but just to practice, I kind of isolated this concept in a Python file just to practice. So if we went ahead and created a new file, it doesn't really matter where, we can end this web server using Control-C, and we'll just say touch test.py. That'll create a file test.py. And what I want to do in here is just print __ name. And when we run this, make sure we are on the correct build system here, Python. When we run this, we get __ main. So that is the value of name. If instead this code was imported in as a module, it would be a little bit different. So what we'll do is we will actually create another file, test2.py, and from here I want to import test. And when we run this, we get the value test. So this is still executing the same line of code, but now it's doing it from another file. And when we do this, we actually get the name of the module. So it'll have __ name when it's being executed directly, or the name of the module when it's imported. Flask uses this information to find other files in our project. So instead of just hard coding __ main like this, we give it a bit of dynamicness by using __ name instead. And this will work whether we are running the code directly or importing it as a module. So that's a lot of detail that we might not need. But anyways, we're going to get rid of these test files. We don't need those anymore. Next up, we have this @app, which is a way to alter the functionality of our code. And this is basically going to associate this function with this route in our application. And the / refers to just the home page. So this page right here. There's a lot going on behind the scenes to associate those, but as a Flask developer, all we have to do is remember to put @app.route with any of our functions, which actually might be harder to remember than it would seem, but that's all we have to do to create a new route. So what we can do is we can actually go through an example of creating a new route. So we could say something like @app.route, and let's just say something like API/testimonials, and we'll create a function testimonials like so. And for this one, I want to return some JSON, which you can actually just return a dictionary and it works fine. Testimonial, and we'll make a list. Let's just make some really simple testimonials. Great. It's okay and fantastic. We made some changes, and a good thing to know is that when we are running our application in development, which we are because earlier on we set an environment variable. If we scroll up, Flask env equals development. Whenever we do that and we make a change in our code, it's going to refresh our server. So what we'll do is we will run our server. We got to make sure it's running for the application to work. And just to show you this, we can make a quick change in our code, save it, and you can see it did a little bit of a refresh down here. Taking a look at the application, it should be running. We can visit that route by saying /API/testimonials, and we get some JSON data. We can right click, inspect, go to the network tab, do a refresh. You can see testimonials, status code 200 OK, and the content type is application JSON. If you forget to save or you're not running in development mode, well, then you're not going to see those changes. You always have to make sure you're getting the latest changes by saving and confirming a refresh on the little server here. So doing refresh now, and it looks good. Now another thing is, if you do something incorrect, you will get an error. So for example, let's say +5. It's just something that doesn't make sense. When we refresh now, we get a type error. And you can see it's status 500, which is an internal server error, but it gives us all of the details. If we were not in development mode, it wouldn't give us all of these details. So let's show that. So we'll close out of the server with Control-C, and then we'll unset that environment variable. So unset Flask env. I think if you're on Windows, you would say set Flask env equal, and then just set it to nothing. So hit enter here. Not positive on that, but I'm pretty sure that'll get you what you need. So now let's run the server. It gives us a warning. This is a development server. Do not use it in production deployment. I guess it notices that we are not in development, so it might think that we are trying to deploy and just give us a little bit of a warning there. So what we can do now is we can refresh, and it says internal server error and a bunch of information, but it hides all of those details. It's not really considered best practice to serve detailed error messages. It's best just to keep them kind of general and then maybe do some logging on the server side, because we don't necessarily want to expose what everything's going on behind the scenes on our server. But let's go ahead. Oh, also another thing we can show is that if we make a change here, let's just put this back to normal. We save. Well, we don't get a server refresh, so we would actually need to restart the server. But let's just go back to development mode. So we'll end that server. We will set the Flask environment to development, and then we will say Flask run. And just do a quick confirmation that everything is as we expect. And there we go. That is how you do a hello world plus a bunch of other information. Hopefully it was helpful, and I'll see you in the next one.